Welcome to OSP EXPO. It's awesome. A lot of folks here. It's awesome. Herbal tea, I'm getting a little laryngitis, but since we're in Colorado, it's the right kind of herbal tea. So I don't want anything going on Twitter or whatever. So I apologize for that, but I have to keep my voice. In reviewing the agenda and looking at the list of exhibitors here, which is an impressive list, and looking at the seminars, I will tell you this is going to have a great use of your time. So it's awesome that so many folks are here. Would encourage you to spend as much time to take in all of the different things this expo has to offer. So before we jump in, welcome to Colorado for all those not from Colorado. How about a show of hands? Who here is not from Colorado? Some competition against the local folks, that's for sure. Well, welcome, special welcome. Thanks for coming all the way in. I came across this picture, and as we look here, we're kind of leaving summer, going into fall. So this has aspects of fall. It's got a little bit of summer in the middle and a little snow in the background, so we're not too far away from that. So I thought it'd be a good way to get us kicked off. Typically a keynote is a lot about technology. Our industry is very much based with technology, and while technology will be a piece of the discussion, really it's the backdrop. What I'd like to talk about is workforce planning and how critical it's going to be for all of us, right? As transformation goes deeper and deeper through our industry. As Sharon mentioned, I'm responsible for infrastructure operations at CenturyLink. Done it the last 18 months, had a variety of other roles, but it's this operations role. And this is the last exercise, I promise. Show of hands of anyone who's in operations, operating, managing networks, doing repair. Put your hands up. It's the brotherhood right there. I'm telling you, right? Regardless of company, folks in operations are connected, right? We are uniquely positioned to understand how well the ecosystem in our company, for whatever that is, in a carrier, technology management, right? Planning, engineering, construction, all the repair, NOx, how healthy that ecosystem is, who understands it best? Ops folks. Right? So it's this last 18 months that has really, really elevated, to me, right, the criticality of really getting serious about workforce planning. Now, I'll tell you, it's kind of a soft topic, right? I mean, it's a little HR-like, so it's a little round on the edges, and, bear with me on this one. Just bear with me. This is something that typically the HR teams, we kind of bring to you. Hey, we're going to go do this, and maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't. However, based on what I've been looking at, and as I look at some of the trends and some of those which I'll share with you today, I absolutely believe that instead of HR leading this, the business needs to be the driver. Because with this technology transformation, I'm a firm believer we need a workforce transformation as well. And I don't think we have really a lot of time. So if we look back 10 years from now, will the winners and losers be decided by who did this the best? Probably not. But I would bet that those who are more successful navigating through this transformational period will have embraced workforce planning at some level as part of their success. So a little bit about CenturyLink. Large carrier, as you'd expect, we serve from very small rural customers up through national and international Fortune 500. Broad portfolio, broadband video, data, IP, managed services, over a large, national fiber network and international transport network. Position as a leader in managed hosting and cloud. And we're really getting into this sort of IT services, big data analytics, and really flushing out, right, the potential of about the 60 worldwide data centers we have. Right? So we're really a company on a journey. This word came up in the introductions. I'd be shocked if it's not a word that you see in the trade press regularly. You'll see it around here in the show. Transformation. It's actually fundamental to the sense of urgency for me on workforce planning. I kind of bucket it into three different levels. First, industry. Our industry has a history. We do something transformational, and then we optimize it. When we do something transformational over a period, we optimize. And it's that period of optimization which enables the next level of transformation. right? I mean, you can go back decades and decades, maybe it's a manual voice switchboard to automated voice switch, copper to fiber. Think of what has happened in optical line systems in the last 15 years. In 2000, right? Optical line system, about 500 gigs of capacity? Today, 8 terabits, going to 16. But it's that optimization across all the technologies that allows us to really sit here as an industry and talk about software-defined networks, network functions virtualized, cloud stuff, right? We need that optimization to get us to the next level. Now, there is a trait we have as an industry, specifically the carriers. We tend to not let some of this transformation pull out some of the last bit of optimization, right? We tend to leave things in the network a while. As we look down the road, that behavior may finally, catch up and bite us, right? Because the skills required to manage all of the legacy and what's coming new, I think, is put pressure on the industry. Companies are transforming. Now, this is an easy one. This is a lob to me, right? CenturyLink. If you want an example of a company that's transforming, go back to 2008, successful rural telco. And then over a series of 7 years, acquired a lot of network assets, hosting and cloud. The management team had a vision. They saw transformation in technologies. They listened to customers, wanted to be served a different way, saw an opportunity to serve customers a different way, over 100% of their own infrastructure. Clearly on a transformational path. Are they the only ones? Heck no. Right? Some will do it in partnerships, some will do it on their own. It's just a proof point of the power of this transformation, that companies are willing to completely transform from what they were to a new place, right, based on this opportunity. Lastly, the technology and networks, right? Everyone in this audience is very familiar with it. This is a simple diagram, right? Customer edge, metro edge, up into the cloud. We're talking about a future where everything will be a service. It's pretty mind-numbing for me, right? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that years ago you talk about, and there was no path to get there. And now there's a path. If you look at where we're at today, the customer's edge is typically defined as, a device to a function. You want a firewall, you put in a box. Want some WAN optimization, put in a box. It's kind of clunky, is the install times, and doesn't ramp as well, right? But it's kind of how we do it. That's where we are. Where are we going? In between those layers, intelligence, awareness, large analytic capabilities, a lot of software control, instant activation. You want a firewall? Bam. Virus protection? Bam. Activated. It's pretty slick. Really what it does is help us deliver as an industry on the promise of enabling our customers to better serve their customers at the pace they choose, which has always been a bit the game, right? How do you reduce down those intervals? How do you enable your customers to operate without a dependency on this industry, how they want to? It's pretty cool. So just in case we're all not aligned that there's some type of transformation going through, you saw Internet of Things on the intro. Here's a study that looks at the level of investment by industry in Internet of Things solutions between now and the end of 2020. Big numbers. Manufacturing alone, 150 billion. If you added up all those numbers, it's hundreds of billions, right? So, I don't tend to believe these things, so I cut it in half. Right? Big number still. It's still a big number. What's that going to do? It's going to pull the industry into transformation, right? Customers are going to want stuff. What happens when you go out and meet with customers and they want things you don't have? What do? If it's going to be in your wheelhouse, you go get them. You're sitting down with the manufacturers and software developers, right? How do you make sure you're on a roadmap so you can support making sure you expand what you deliver to those customers so someone else doesn't come in and do it? That'll act as a catalyst to pull us more quickly into this period of transformation. So, right, we're all aligned, right? Something's happening. Now, this is awesome for the industry. I think it's awesome. This is a period of great innovation, investment. Man, who here doesn't like investment? I'm all about it, right? It's all good. It's all good. Endless opportunities, so a great time to be here. So you ask, well, Rotter, then what is the problem? Well, the problem is, I see a perfect storm brewing, and it's not that far away. The problem statement is probably, the breadth of skills and the depth of skills required to support all of the legacy and the new services we're going to have are going to come under a lot of pressure and may not be sufficient. This is a problem statement, right? I see sort of three contributing factors. First, the market. When I look at what we provision every month on legacy services, it's kind of staggering still. We talk about Ethernet, we talk about all this stuff, right? But you go look, and we provision a lot of stuff on legacy services. Great margin, right? So sometimes it's hard to go into the banker and say, hey, this stuff that's generating all this great margin, I'd like to rip it out, put it on this new stuff, but just closer to our future, about a third the margin, and it's going to be a big drain on OpEx and CapEx. You in? Sometimes that's a hard discussion, right? Sometimes that's a hard discussion. So there's a bit of an inertia with some of our legacy services. Just keeps that stuff in the network longer. Then you've got efficiency. What is the role, in the operations side of the business, right? Lower cost. Totally get it. Sign me up. But you got to do it the right way, right? If you just blindly automate, you could end up losing key skills in the business as you chase efficiency. So you have to do it with some awareness. Last, workforce, and we'll talk a little bit more about this one specifically. We're going into a period where, that big baby boomer bubble, people have been talking about it for years, right? Guess what? It's moving. And we're going to see a lot of attrition in the U.S. workforce overall, and specifically within telecom. It's going to lower the pool of skills. And I'm going to show you that telecom isn't really the greatest at attracting, right, some of the new college talent. Right? So it's going to create pressure on the overall available resources. Remember, we got a lot of stuff embedded, and we're going to do a lot of stuff new. It's going to create some pressure. I mentioned an ecosystem. Each of you here, if you're a carrier, this might look a little bit familiar. If you're a manufacturer, maybe a little bit different. But for us, if I was to go put something new into the network, new service, new technology, right? A generic ecosystem is kind of like you got some folks who grab the technology, work with the manufacturers, they certify, they test, they work through the software issues, get the services ready, then they hand it over to a planning function. The planning function responsible for capacity management, expanding the network, introducing new technology. They get their plans ready and they hand it into a build function. The build function, sort of engineering, construction, inside, outside plant, that type of go out and get it into the network. And then it goes into a run function. Local and national field forces, repair centers, NOCs, et cetera, all of the groups involved in making sure you can support not only the network, but customers. That's the ecosystem. So to introduce something new, some cloud services, as SDN and NFV, we tend to look at them as complementary, roll them out together. As they make their way into the network, that ecosystem has to be healthy. You can't have a weak link. And if you think about legacy services, we have dozens of manufacturers, dozens, hundreds of platforms. That ecosystem is required. Can't have a chink in the armor, right? So when you start looking at it in totality, right, look at it in your company, do you have a view to what it is? Is there a plan in place to actively manage? Do you understand what leaves and what comes in and they replace in the right skill sets? But going forward, a view to that ecosystem is going to be important. I'm going to share with you a little bit of data here. Same format, 2 slides. Y-axis is percent of workforce, X-axis is age. So the first is the traditional network organization at CenturyLink, the engineering folks, compared to the U.S. engineering workforce overall. U.S. is blue, CenturyLink is green. Behind CenturyLink, I think it's fair to put brackets and say telecom. Because in the 25 years I've been in this business, I have not seen that when you go around and look at the carrier community, When I look at who we talk to as we hire from you and you hire from us and we talk to manufacturers, I don't know that we're all that different, right? So you could almost think of it as an industry surrogate. What you see is we're skewed to just a higher age in the engineering workforce compared to the US workforce overall. That's not a problem today. But 40% of the US workforce is over 55. That's just a fact. Go out 5 years. This kind of becomes just math. At some point, people have talked about this baby boomer effect, and at some point, that group is just going to keep moving, and they're going to move on and do something else. So it gets risk on the high end. By the way, those are skills. They aren't just legacy. That affects legacy and new across that ecosystem. I have some homework for you, which, by the way, please do not turn in. When you go back next week, talk to your HR folks and just say, hey, how many of our employees, when they get to 62, how long are they around? How much longer? In 2 years or 4 years? What does that look like? The answer may surprise you and help get you a little bit more excited about getting after workforce planning. So the high end is kind of math, right? Let's go to the low end. Not a large percentage coming in new, sort of that college graduate thought. So there's a gap. Now, when I think about this gap, my hypothesis is when we have a vacancy, right, we tend to go, oh, we need experienced talent. So we go hire from you all. And when you have it, you hire from us because we see where everyone goes. So it feels like my hypothesis is that we tend to dip into each other. People want to change firms. They have different opportunities. It's all good. But I think what's happening is there may not be enough attention being paid on the entrance of top talent out of colleges into our industry, which when you're going through a period of transformation should be pretty critical. All right, we talk about ecosystems, right? So let's just break down the ecosystem. Just the traditional, same group, traditional network, CenturyLink, broke it down into plan, build, and run. And what you see is the engineering and construction, that build function, skewed even a little bit stronger on age. Planning, skewed. And then the run function looks pretty balanced. But you got to remember that's made up of lots of different organizations, right? I will tell you there are elements of the run function that kind of look like planning and some that are just very much skewed to the left. When you blend them together, you get the red line. So as an industry, what do we typically do when you run into resource issues? Right? We contract. So go out and talk to your firms where you contract engineering resources from. They're seeing the same thing. They're faced with the same issues. That crutch, which, by the way, has been very effective for years, that crutch is under pressure. And so really it's a little bit of a wake-up call to say, hey, might need to be having some conversations with those firms because we both can't keep going down the same path and not be talking and run right off a cliff. So let's look at the new entrant piece. And this, I tell you, when I first saw this, I don't know if it's shocked or just disappointed. So what this looks at is the number of college graduates, the big green line, since 1970. Right, a lot of data. Total graduates, all programs. The blue line is those numbers of graduates each year in engineering and computer science. I don't know about you, but with the push on STEM in this country, I was shocked, at least in the last 20 years. As a percent, it's like 8 to 9%, flat to down in the last 25 years. That's a domestic production in this country. So, what does it bring up? A couple questions, right? If you have a program for hiring folks at a college, right, you don't want talent, you want top talent. Well, this country's not producing a ton, so there's probably going to be a lot of competition for these folks, right? A lot of competition. So if you have a program, is it working well? Do you know if it's working well? Do you look at churn? Do you look at where they progress in the business? Or are you just training them for somebody else? Because they're going to come under pressure, right? A lot of demand. That also opens up the question of international talent. If this is all we're going to produce as a country, do you need to go internationally? Not for some sort of labor rate arbitrage, top talent. You're going through a transformational period. You need people to come in. You need to get future leaders, get them into your business, grow, become a part of where your company is headed. But that's a different talent pool, and that's a different set of competitors when you look at those resources. Right? So I got to tell you, I was a bit shocked at this one. But basically the point is there are not a lot of folks coming out that we're all going to need if you think that, and that power part of that bubble starts exiting en masse in 5-6 years. So, do we even get any of these new college graduates? As an industry, this looks at, and it was published last year, it looks at all of the industries, the top industries, where engineering and computer science graduates go to. So to add insult to injury, so not only are there not a lot of these folks, telecom is typically a distant fourth, best case third, and that's in computer science. So, we got a battle in front of us, right? And that's an industry thing, right? So what is it as an industry? And is it as a millennial coming out that we don't look attractive, we're too much structure, we don't try hard enough? I'm not sure. But it's probably worth evaluation. Because the path of how much of this talent's coming out is sort of set, right? You can just kind of keep plotting that curve or that line. The question is, how are you going to participate in it? So where are we at? We got a lot of good skills that just naturally are going to leave the business in 5 or more years, right? It's a natural process. We don't have a great pipeline into the industry, right? It's cause for concern. So let's go back to the ecosystem. What happens if we don't manage it well? All right, what if there are weak links in the ecosystem? We're going to roll out all this cool stuff. Could you lose velocity on new services? I mean, you have a lot of revenue baked in. I bet there's a lot of plans out there that all this new stuff, for all you product folks, right? Please give me the money and then we'll sell a ton, right? A lot of new revenue and future plans baked into this. What if the software is not great? What if it's not designed well? What if it's hard to support? Is taking a black eye on the brand in this transformational set of services really, the risk to take? Be shamed to be bypassed just because someone else managed that well. How about platform stability, mean time to repair? Not just on legacy platforms, all this new stuff. We all know, right? Each platform is a little different. They're like fingerprints, snowflakes. I mean, they all operate a little different. And you need to have people who understand those nuances for optimizing performance, or if you have an event. Is it worth another 2 or 3 hours to get a box up and running because you just didn't have the right skill set? Customers are at the end of that incident, right? How about labor? Is it possible to mismanage the skills in the business such that you're paying an incredible top dollar rate to somebody who placed a bet on building a staff of, legacy service skills, and now you have to pay top dollar because you had a bunch, you just didn't manage it? Worst case, you have the inability to support it, the manufacturer has long since stopped supporting it, and you have to disrupt 1 or 2 years of OpEx and CapEx to go rip and replace, right? So I guess, while a little bit gloomy, but these are risks that could happen, right, if that ecosystem isn't healthy. So what to do? Lots of things to do. There are a lot of opportunities, right? So I'll give you just a couple thoughts, but there's a lot of others. So you can look at life cycle and say, you know what? I have to say grace as a business over all this stuff. Are there platforms that are really, you know what? I want to shorten this up. I want to accelerate their replacement, right? Very thoughtfully. And then the skills that are associated with this platform, I can go place and retrain for gaps in other areas. That'd be an opportunity, right? Another place, right? Automation. Automation is not a bad thing. Putting work into an employee's hands that really only requires an employee to touch it, all the garbage work is automated out, that's a good thing, right? You just have to be aware that you're going to free up some resources. You need to make sure that you understand where you want those resources to go. But again, both those things, all these actions and other ones you can think of, right, they tend to shorten up the breadth of the skills that you need in the business. So when you start talking about skills and you start talking about coverage, et cetera, it really feels like we're starting to talk about workforce planning. So we've kind of set the stage. We got transformation going. We got some real labor issues. We've seen the facts. So what is a workforce plan? I tell you, when I first heard it, it's not like I, set the hook and they kind of reeled me in. I'm like, so, what is it? What are we doing? And so this is what was described to me, and this is what caught my attention. It aligns skills to revenue. I'm listening. Skills to revenue. That feels like a good thing, right? It's going to help you manage that war for top talent. The attrition, just math, right? It's going to help you identify where you have gaps so you can more strategically and thoughtfully address those. So I'm like, okay, I'm in. What do they have? What is this workforce plan? Well, there's two key ingredients. So you have business objectives, right? So no surprise, revenue by product with a technology plan overlay. Makes sense, right? It gives you a future view of where the business expects revenue, on what platforms, and what are the technology plans associated with it. That's a good input. You then have, talent objectives. What are those? It's a current view and a future view of the skills you're going to need within your company's cost constraints, because every company's cost constraints are different. But it's very much tailored to you. Mix those up, and now you've got the makings, of a plan. So this, by the way, you won't see this footnoted as like a Accenture or Harvard business case or whatever. Nah, we made this up. This is like me and the HR folks hanging out, and we just start chatting about, what have they observed? What have we all observed in different companies about how, the workforce planning function sometimes happens. So some things are reactive and some are proactive. So what do you see sometimes? Hey, maybe sales and expense get out of whack, so you slow down hiring. People optimize to the resources they have in their departments, and we move on. It's not really workforce planning, right? I mean, it's sort of like you get dealt, get dealt a hand and you played it, right? And you moved on, right? You move up the stack and there's some productivity, usually driven by, hey, are there ways to drive efficiency, automate, right? Lower cost. Out of that becomes resources that can be freed up, right? And you can, again, fill in gaps, do some retraining, et cetera. The intent of the productivity typically is cost, not workforce planning, so it's really hard to call that something proactive. It's a good thing because it helps the business. Then you kind of get into more proactive, a skills inventory. How about answering the question of what do you have and what's the depth at each one of those skills? I can tell you, I'd love to know that. The other thing I think you have to ask for each employee, what do you want to do? Because wouldn't it be cool to be able to say, hey, I have a lot of folks doing this thing. I don't have enough doing this. Oh, but look, these folks over here have said, I'd really want to move into this space. It's good for employees, good for the business, right? It's a simpler way to execute, right? So it's good to know. So you do a skills baseline. Up from that, you get into an operational workforce plan, really short-terming. Hey, who am I hiring? Who's terminating? Who's promoting? You overlay that onto your, your skills inventory, and you kind of manage a quarter or two out. It's not bad, but your head's down. Where do you want to be? You want to be at the top of that curve, right? Head up, looking down the road. What we just talked about, more strategic planning. What are those business inputs? What are our talent needs? How do we know? Putting together a plan then that it can flex with the business, because it has to become a practice. It can't be a plan that somehow gets funded one year and not the next. It has to become part of how your company operates. So what do they look like? Now, I got to tell you, I haven't built one, but I'm about to. So the approach we're going to take, it's called role-based workforce planning. And again, there's lots of ways to do this. But there's two steps. And the first step is you take all of the roles you have, and by the way, roles are not people. They're roles. Principal engineer, tier 3 tech support, it's a role. And you lay them up, stack them up, and say, align them based on how important they are in achieving your strategy. What's the risk in achieving your strategy? Now, I have 4 generic buckets here. I mean, if you do this, you'll end up with more. I just did this to genericize the discussion. So in this example, you'd have maybe a small percent that are critical, strategic. Probably a big thinking role, right? Probably not necessarily for new, could be for legacy, right? How critical is it for the business? Then you moved into maybe roles that are more high impact, bringing incremental executional advantages. Collectively, vital support's probably more the factory BAU, how work gets done each day. And then you may end up with a bucket, for purposes of discussion, I called it reinvented. As you go through this, you might find that there's some roles that go at different parts of the business, some that get reinvented upwards, and there may be some, depending on the situation, that get reinvented, not in the business. But it depends on your situation. But those are probably the options. So you go through here, by the way, this is where you lay in your skills information as well. So now you have roles categorized by how important it is to hit your strategy, and then you differentiate each one. And why do you do that? There's examples of variables on the right, but you do that for two reasons. One, you want to make sure that role has a good chance of fulfilling their accountability on executing on the strategy. And two, you do want to retain employees. So what does the differentiation look like? In the critical strategic, you may say, hey, those are big-time thinkers, deep knowledge. It could be legacy, it could be forward-looking. I'm going to use compensation as a lever, and I may use ownership of critical technical plan implementations. Really? To add some meat to it. In your vital support roles, it could be a lot of work simplification, productivity, job rotations. Remember, we're going through a tough skills period, so it's going to make probably a lot of sense to have some skills job rotation, build different skills. But you differentiate each one of the role buckets, right? And if you do it right, good things should happen. On the roles that are tied more to the high exposure and execution to your strategy, you should see greater innovation, attraction or retention of more talented workers. You should see less turnover. When you look at the roles, maybe a little less critical to the strategy, important, but just all relative, right? It's all relative. You may see initially some moderate turnover, but that's only because you just took a bunch of roles in certain places and moved a bunch of chairs. After that, it should stabilize. Because remember, the goal is not to drive a bunch of turnover. You need to retain and develop the skills in the business. And you should see a lot of work simplification and a lot of productivity improvements. Employees only touching work that employees need to touch. Higher engagement drives greater thinking every day. So it should be all positive if it's done right. So here's a case study, and in all fairness, I ought to call it a pre-case study because I haven't done it yet. So if I'm invited back in 2 years, I can tell you how it went. So this is where we're at from a NOC perspective. These are the infrastructure NOCs within CenturyLink. So we have local, national, global networks, all right? A lot of voice data, a lot of stuff. They produce a lot of information, a lot of alarms. And they go into our NOCs today. Now, we have about, 13, 14 NOCs. Most of the NOCs exist based on their previous legacy company position, right? So, we had a lot of M&A activity, and so the NOCs kind of where they were prior to that activity. So kind of siloed. High performing, though. They all perform well, no issues. We're a bit reactive on staffing. We have some system issues sometimes between because you still have some of the legacy systems that haven't been fully integrated. So from a running day in and day out, great. If the business didn't change, we'd probably be okay. But if I look down the road 5 years, 8 years, and I look what's happening to layer 1 through 3, and I look at cloud and hosting, and I look at delivering solutions on 100% CenturyLink infrastructure where we're taking customers' ERP solutions, running mission-critical stuff, that just doesn't feel like the right structure. I don't think we get there. And then we have to look at sort of our infrastructure groups a little differently. So last year, we announced a new structure. So what we're doing is we're going from a larger number to a smaller number. So we're going to create concentrations of folks doing the traditional businesses, and then we'll create a small number of NOCs for folks doing the growth technologies. Now, again, we just saw some numbers that says a lot of attrition coming in the business, right? So we're going to use attrition, the natural attrition, to make this happen. So as we collapse down those centers, create greater concentrations, easier to train, easier to cross-train. As services move from traditional to growth, easier to make that transition. So it should make it an operational, easier model to execute on. But over 5 to 8 years, there's going to be a lot of people movement. As somebody leaves to do something else, where does that role then go in the end state plan? It's a lot of moving parts. Can you imagine doing this without some sort of plan? A lot of risk. Employees deserve a plan. The business deserves a plan. Right? So we make sure as we go through this, we only get one chance to do it right. We have to make sure we pop out on the other end, making sure we're well integrated into the future of where this transformation is headed. So what are we going to do? We're going to do a plan. So in October, we're actually putting the finishing touches on a skills inventory. Right? We need to know what skills do we have and how deep are they across all those dozens of manufacturers and hundreds of platforms. And we need to look at the stuff going in, the platforms going in. Where's our depth and bench there? We need to ask employees, by the way, is there something else you'd like to understand or learn, some other place you'd like to work? So as a plan comes together, we can accommodate that, right, to the best of our ability. We need to do a role analysis. We're going to go structure, create our buckets. We're sitting down in October. We're going to put the first pen to paper on it. I will tell you, as we've been thinking about it, one learning is this is a lot harder than it looks. When you actually get in and you start breaking this down, this is a lot more detailed. It's a lot more thinking, which should be, right? You're making big changes. I share that only because this isn't something that you can just jump into, get done in a quarter, and you kind of go on to the next thing. We'll integrate our skills. We'll come up with a plan, and the goal would be in 16, we now have something we're formally executing on that we're using to track and manage the business, adjusting to business inputs as we go. But think about it, 16, I just lost another year. I'm targeting 5 before things really hit the fan. I just gave back 1. So again, it's one of those things that what creates a sense of urgency is once you see it, then you're like, okay, I've got to take some action now. Because to get it into the business, to get it integrated, to get it mature, it's going to take more than just that year, right? And we get closer and closer. So, I know, a little dramatic, right? Isn't that a cool picture? I mean, that's a cool picture. A storm is coming, my opinion, right? I really do think, it's time, the time is now, given how long it takes to implement things, that we have to stand up and look directly into the landscape and recognize something's coming. We've talked about the transformation. Hopefully we're aligned that something's happening. We may debate how far we're into it, but hopefully we're not debating if it's happening. If you look at skills availability, workforce availability, right? It's going to come under pressure. No one did anything wrong, right? It's just going to come under pressure, and we're not managing the new entrants well enough. The good news is, right, we're going to go through all this transformation and do all this skills stuff under an umbrella of higher than ever customer expectations. Awesome, right? I mean, last I checked, I don't know, does anyone out there have customers whose expectations are here? I don't know that I haven't found one. They've always been high. They should be. But when you start taking mission critical applications and you become that extended team for a company and they lose that control and you're running it for them, you didn't think they'd get any higher? I tell you, they do. So the umbrella under which you're going to do all of this, right, is incredibly high customer expectations. That's why I think workforce planning is something to seriously be considered. So before closing, a couple thoughts. To the manufacturers, there are great opportunities with your customers. Great. But it's going to require some creativity. Let's face it, we're some people that when we buy stuff, we leave it in the network for a while. So you can count on some maintenance revenue. But it's going to have to be a creative approach. Understand, I encourage you to understand really what prevents the life cycle management of some of these platforms to not go quicker. And then sit back and get creative to help us get there. The rewards are good for those that take that approach. For those that are providing, the engineering, the technical staff to the industry, you see the same stuff. I've talked to you. All right? Maybe you don't solve this one alone. Maybe the opportunity is you get with your customers and say, hey, let's do this workforce planning thing together. Let's lay it out. What do you see? Where's your gap? Where can I fit in? Maybe we move from a project-based set of work to something that's long-term and strategic, where you're filling in specific skill development roles. So you're literally inserted into the business. Might be a thought. We'd encourage those discussions. And for the individuals, man, awesome. My question is, what's your skill plan? Because if we're not doing a great job as an industry getting in new folks, and a bunch of folks are about ready to leave, for those here, it's happy times. What's your skill plan? Where do you want to go? What's your career look like? Great opportunity to go out and develop incremental skills, because you're going to be in high demand. High demand. It's awesome. Now, there are a lot of companies that do skills development training. I will tell you, Sharon Volman would take a call from anybody in this room to say, hey, can we sit down and talk? Can OSP come in and help us, right, as we think about this skills development and training? Great opportunity for those firms. So last, right, today's discussion was meant to really elevate a view to the transformation going through our industry, right, and it's really exciting times. But it was also meant to elevate, in my opinion, how critical it is for all of us to embrace workforce planning so we can successfully navigate through that transformational period. I really appreciate your time today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for the great keynote presentation, and thankfully we also have a little time for Q&A. So we're going to raise the lights, and we have 2 mic runners out there. Just raise your hand if you have questions that you'd like to pose to Matt. You've answered all of their questions.
Stymied 1,000 people.
It's incredible.
She owes me a bottle of wine. So keep your hands down. She owes me wine.
I see one over here.
Thank you. Looking at your charts and the age of your workforce, are you starting at the right time, or you think you're late in terms of this process that you're going to try to implement in October?
I think we're late. In all honesty, I mean, I was talking with somebody who works in the, someone we have a contractor relationship on the engineering side, and we were talking, and my first conversation with this firm 6 years ago was worried about this. But when you looked at the numbers, you're like, I've got time. Well, now I think the time is, when you look at what it takes to implement and mature, I think we're late. I think we're late.
Anyone else?
Whatever.
Great.
Do you see the changes in your operational changes? Workforce planning, does it affect just the OpEx costs of your network, or does it have an effect on the CapEx requirements, and does it increase or decrease those costs?
Well, hopefully, there'll be some effects on both ends, right? So to the degree that we've aligned on an accelerated life cycle program, you're going to see some incremental CapEx that's going to go in. So I would say we're going to see some CapEx effects. On the OpEx side, I mean, quite frankly, the resource pool is going to get smaller. I mean, I don't see a path that says you automate away that much of the workforce. I just don't see it as possible. There's too much resident intelligence you need to operate these networks. So I'm not sure on the OpEx piece at this point, because we still have so many gaps that we have to go in and fill. I mean, I think 2-3 years from now, I have a much better sense of what that opportunity is. But right now, I'm much more concerned about, do we have the right folks with the right skills in the right place for the ecosystem and the legacy, and what we're going to need going forward.
Good answer.
Hello, what do you think it will take to get companies to proactively buy into the workforce management and the costs associated with it? And kind of what are the risks that you would present and say, well, if you don't do this, then these are the bad things that are going to happen?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the costs are of doing it. I know what the cost could be if you don't do it. Right? Really, you're talking about aligning skills to revenue, right? And you're not really sure what the costs are going to be until you actually have an assessment and say, what do I have? What do I need? Right? Because what you may find, you have some glaring gaps that you have to solve. To the degree you solve them internally, there's no real cost. Right? There may be some incremental training type costs. So I think typically what happens is people stub their toe, They get burned, something bad happens, and then there's those quick meetings internally, and they're like, we got to do some more force planning. And the next thing you know, it's like the people rush out and go do it. This is one of those ones I think it's a little harder to go in and proactively say, here's what we need, because you sound a little bit like sky's falling, right? Because it hasn't happened. I mean, this is from the ops guy who keeps walking in and saying, no, we got to take out those 5 Es. I'm telling you, tomorrow they're going to go, you know. People have been saying that for 20 years, right? So people tend to wait. And so I think what's going to happen is people are going to wait, then they're going to get caught or something bad will happen, and then they're going to try and scramble and try and make up lost ground.
Really good point. The show floor is open, but make sure you save the date.